Resolution 100 back in 2022, I joined Iranian Americans and dozens of my bipartisan colleagues to highlight this reality. The head of the snake is in Tehran. This resolution recognizes this simple fact and expresses support for the Iranian people's desire to rid themselves of it for all time and to establish their right to a democratic, free, secular, prosperous, and non-nuclear republic. Within just a few months of introducing this measure, a bipartisan majority of the entire U.S. House of Representatives joined not merely as supporters, but as co-sponsors. That's a profound statement of the strong support that the Iranian resistance has among the people of the United States. And it wasn't long after that the Iranian people rose up to reclaim their freedom from their tormentors and oppressors in Tehran. Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants. The message of the uprising, like that of House Resolution 100, is unambiguous. The Iranian people want regime change. The tyrants of Tehran rest uneasy on a throne of international terrorism and internal suppression. The clerics and their IRGC have not only unleashed terrorism against the people of Israel, but they are murdering Iranians with increasing ferocity. Yet we also know that the Ayatollahs are doing this as a means of survival, a gruesome strategy that depends on taking innocent life. The mullahs seek carnage outside of Iran so they can divert attention from their own weakness inside of Iran as they kill and torture the tens of thousands of protesters that they've imprisoned since the 2022 protests began. That's why the regime in Tehran is not interested in peace in the region. For as long as it's in power, peace will be impossible to achieve. So what should U.S. policy look like, particularly in light of ongoing protests, rising executions, and the regime's direct role in terrorism inside and outside of Iran? Well, the free world must recognize that the people of Iran want this regime gone in its entirety. And to help them, the United States must adopt two policies outlined by former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo at a meeting with Mrs. Maryam Rajavi just hours before the October 7th attack occurred in the Middle East. First, the United States must put maximum pressure on the regime in Tehran. This means that it must stop offering regime additional capital, and it also means the administration must enforce the many sanctions that are required by United States and international law. And the United States must refrain from actively undermining the Iranian opposition. Second, the United States government must provide maximum political and moral support to the Iranian people and adopt the steps outlined by measures such as House Resolutions 100 and 627. The fountainhead of international tensions is the dictatorship in Iran. It is funding the most extensive terrorist network in history. The sanctions against Iran were producing a growing popular resistance to the regime, yet each time the opposition was about to boil over, President Obama and later Mr. Biden took billions of dollars owned by the Iranian people and instead turned them over to the oppressors of the Iranian people. Biden's refusal to enforce sanctions has meant more than $30 billion of revenues to Iran. The American government was about to release another $6 billion when the attack on Israel embarrassed them to at least temporarily back down. We must understand that when this government releases money to Iran or relaxes the enforcement of sanctions, It is funding the very terror operations directed against the Iranian people, the people of Israel, and someday soon, I am afraid, against the people of the United States. When we leave our borders wide open, we are creating an open pathway for terrorists into our country. And when we send aid to Hamas-controlled Gaza, we give aid and comfort to the very forces that unleashed such terror on October 7th, that daily practice such horrors on their own people, and who aspire to unleash it against America. I have known the Iranian opposition for many years, and I've seen the strong bipartisan support for it that has been expressed time and time again in the U.S. Congress. Congress has repeatedly opposed attempts by the mullahs to marginalize, divide, discredit, and suppress the Iranian freedom movement, and particularly its driving force, the MEK. The Congress has repeatedly called for the protection of Iranian dissidents at Ashraf, both in Iraq and later Albania. We have seen that support manifest with the removal of the unfair sanctions against MEK, not only by this country, but by so many European governments as well. These efforts are part of a growing realization that the Iranian resistance must be united and that freedom-loving people around the world must rally behind them. The Congress has made its position clear, and I fervently urge the President and his administration to do the same. The world will never be safe from international terrorism as long as the Iranian regime holds power. And in this season, in which we fervently pray for peace, it is essential that we back those prayers with action to remove the principal threat to peace in the world today. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct privilege and high honor to introduce to you the leader of the Iranian resistance, Madam Maryam Rajavi, the President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, President-elect Rajavi.
Honorable representatives, dear friends of the Iranian people and resistance, I commend each and every one of you. This conference, which focuses on the religious fascism ruling Iran, is more urgent than ever before. The Iranian regime is an imminent threat to the regional and global peace and security. Last year, at this time, a vast uprising by the Iranian people took place in over 280 cities to overthrow the regime. The world clearly heard the protesters' calls across Iran, who loudly called for the overthrow of the regime. Cornered by a movement that seeks his regime's overthrow, Khamenei started a war in the Middle East. He's using this war to prevent the eruption of another major uprising. Since the start of this regional conflict 2 months ago, at least 225 prisoners have been executed in Iran. Supporters of the MEK and those who participated in protests are being executed one after another. The regime's leaders must be prosecuted for the crimes against humanity and warmongering. In the meantime, Raisi, the regime's criminal president, who has a track record of crimes against humanity over 4 decades, and who was a member of the Death Commission, having direct responsibility in the 1988 massacre of thousands of political prisoners, is now going to Geneva to participate in the Global Refugee Forum. Instead of taking part in the forum, he must be held accountable and face justice for 44 years of deaths, carnage, and aggression under his watch. Last week, the Office of the National Council of Resistance of Iran in Berlin was the target of a terrorist attack. Therefore, the regime is at war against the Iranian people and the region and the world. 3 weeks after the start of the Middle East war, Khamenei, in a public speech, stated, "The war is not between Gaza and Israel. It is fight between good and evil." Good and evil is a code word that the regime used during Khomeini's 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s. That war and all the regime's warmongering serve the same purpose, to prevent its overthrow. The regime's warmongering in the region and its opposition to peace are not new. After the 1993 peace agreement, the Iranian resistance congratulated the leaders of Israel, Palestine, and the US. But the Mullah's regime was the main party that actively engaged in hostility to the peace process and tried to sabotage it, including, among others, by fueling extremism and activating proxy groups to cause division among the people of Palestine. What is new is that the regime had given a new dimension to its meddling by provoking this destructive war while facing the crisis of overthrow. Since the war began, the regime has opened 3 other fronts using its proxy groups: a war in international waters, the war in Iraq and Syria with numerous attacks on US forces, and the war in southern Lebanon. The regime actively sends weapons to southern Lebanon. Today, there are misunderstandings about this war, such as claims Khamenei and his allies had no prior knowledge about the war, or that the regime's warmongering in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and international waters are unrelated to the Middle East conflict, or that the crisis can be overcome without putting the focus on the Iranian regime or adopting a policy of firmness against it. But according to numerous evidence and documents, the head of the snake of war and terrorism lies in Tehran. If this regime was not in power in Tehran, the Israel-Palestine conflict would not have turned into such a horrifying nightmare. Instead, it could have moved on a peaceful path. For this reason, the Middle East crisis has one solution and only one solution: firm action against the religious fascism in Iran. House Resolution 100, supported by 241 representatives from both parties, is a shining example for such a policy. The initiatives by the US Congress and the approval of various laws to permanently block the regime's access to $6 billion released in the hostage deal, or its measures to prevent the regime from selling oil, are very effective and significant steps in this regard. It is crucial for the US House of Representatives and Senate to take the lead in implementing this decisive policy in the US and internationally. As a comprehensive solution, we propose the following actions. First, encourage the European Union and Canada to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization and using all necessary tools to realize this. Second, by collaboration with European allies, activate the snapback mechanism in UN Security Council Resolution 2231 and re-implementing its resolutions regarding the regime's nuclear projects and imposing comprehensive sanctions. Third, recognize religious fascism in Iran as a global threat to peace and security and place it under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter. And fourth, recognize the Iranian people's struggle to overthrow their regime and the US's rebellion against the terrorist IRGC. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, President-elect Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, and we really appreciate your insights and policy recommendations. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hananea Manpour. I am a practicing attorney from Northern Virginia, and it is my honor to welcome you today to this bipartisan congressional briefing, a significant gathering sponsored by the Organization of Iranian American Communities. With 41 chapters across the United States, OIAC has been instrumental in fostering dialogue and understanding the critical issues facing Iran and their global implications. It is my pleasure to also welcome our community leaders and bipartisan members of Congress joining us today as we delve into these pressing matters and issues that Mrs. Rajavi just spoke of. We are now joined by Congressman Ruben Gallego from Arizona, who will speak with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. My name is Congressman Ruben Gallego. It's a pleasure to be here. I welcome you to your Capitol Hill, as well as virtually, Madame Rajavi. Thank you for coming back and joining us again. Let me begin with the truth, that the United States Congress unequivocally supports the Iranian people's aspiration for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear republic, and we as a nation call for the protection of dissidents, both inside and outside Iran, without any hesitation. For decades, the Iranian regime has silenced, persecuted, and killed those who push for a free Iran. Let us remember the sacrifices made by those who have paid the ultimate price in their quest for freedom. Instead of representing the interests of the Iranian people, the regime has long used its diplomatic representations abroad to orchestrate terror plots and whitewash gross human rights violations in Iran. Since the war in Gaza, we have seen a significant and sustained increase on U.S. attacks on U.S. and coalition forces by Iran-backed militants and militias, resulting already in 60-plus injured U.S. service members. These injuries are not without a clear objective. It is our shared responsibility to ensure that their aspirations for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Iran are realized. While the U.S. and our allies do what is right to pressure Iran and its partners in the region, we must also acknowledge the people in Iran for pushing for this change. I was honored to do my part when I joined my colleagues from both sides of the aisle, something very rare you see here on Hill, for us to co-sponsor the House resolution in support of the Iranian people and condemning human rights violations. The resolution demands free and open elections, economic restructuring to promote innovation, equal rights for all, regardless of gender, religion, or ethnicity, and preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. But we must continue to do more. That's why I pushed Secretary Blinken and Yellen alike to stem the flow of illicit Iranian oil sales to China and called on Secretary Blinken to use his power at the State Department to respond to Iran's failure to comply with the IAEA. We're keeping up the pressure, and by continuing the fight for the Iranian people, the light of freedom at the end of the tunnel will become brighter and brighter. Thank you for being here today. God bless.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We are now joined by Congressman Brad Sherman from California.
Hello, I'm Brad Sherman from California's best named city, Sherman Oaks. It is so good to be back with you again. The Iranian American community, dedicated to a free, democratic, and non-nuclear Iran. That's why I joined with my colleague Tom McClintock, who I know spoke earlier here today, and over 160 members of Congress in reintroducing our resolution condemning the regime's horrific human rights abuses. As the chief Democratic sponsor of House Resolution 100, I'm pleased that it expresses our support for the Iranian people's desire for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran, and condemns the violations of human rights and the state-sponsored terrorism of the Iranian regime. And you know, I've been in Congress for 27 years. I've been a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee for 27 years, where I am the most senior Democrat, and I have been fighting on these issues with you for 27 years. I join you today as the Iranian people suffer from an illegitimate regime. We saw the brutal murder of Mahsa Amini, as well as the murder of those who protested her murder, including not only teenagers, but even children. Tens of thousands have been arrested. Some have been sentenced to death. The regime's legacy of murdering dissidents is nothing new. We saw it when they took power. We saw it in 1988. We see it today. And now we see the morality police. Again, as a 16-year-old, Argmita Garavad, who supposedly wasn't wearing clothing just right, she's now left in a coma after being attacked by officers, possibly brain dead, little likelihood of recovery. Beyond clamping down on women's hair coverings and clothing, the regime is continuing to trample free speech. The Iranian rapper Tumaj Salehi, who was previously detained for seeming to support anti-government protests, was released on bail and then arrested again. But the regime's violence will not undermine the resolve of the Iranian people to continue demanding their freedom and basic human dignity. And Congress stands with the Iranian people. The American people stand with the Iranian people. I voted for the No Funds for Iranian Terrorism Act. It was outrageous. Iran seizes American hostages and then seeks an advantage. In this case, the movement of $6 billion from South Korea to Qatar. There should be no advantages to seizing American hostages, and if, God forbid, Iran gets an advantage, the government gets an advantage by seizing an American hostage, after those hostages are released, we should try to take away the advantage they got. This is not a legitimate deal when Americans are held hostage. And anytime there's a kidnapping and you have a chance to recover the ransom, recover the ransom. It's not like the kidnapper has a legitimate right to the ransom. This is a regime that finances terrorism around the world. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi, and those are just the groups that begin with the letter H. We could go through the whole alphabet. We saw the brutal attack of Hamas on Israel. We see the terrorist attacks from Hezbollah into northern Israel. We see the terrorism of the Iranian regime inside the sovereign Republic of Albania, where they attack people just for the views that they hold. And we see the attacks of this regime trying to kill American troops in Syria and Iraq, where they are helping defend America from the reestablishment of ISIS. I share your dream of a free Iran, an Iran where people can make their voices heard, where they're not threatened by terrorism, imprisonment, torture, rape, and execution. An Iran where women are free to decide how they dress and people are free to share their government. An Iran where Mahsa Amini and countless women like her would be alive today. That's why for decades we have worked together to replace this brutal regime. As the Iranian people continue to courageously fight for freedom, the American people need to be there. The American Congress needs to be there. And we need to pass Resolution 100. I will continue to work with you until we achieve democracy and freedom for the Iranian people. I'm Congressman Brad Sherman. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We are now joined by Congressman Mike Garcia from California.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming today, especially those making the long flight from California. I know there's a few of you out there. Thanks for putting the lovely California flag next to the podium as well. I'll be brief, but I want to be true to this one. I want to not be tepid on this issue. I don't have prepared remarks, but I do think it's important that we recognize that evil does exist. And if you ask me to put a pin on the globe on where the epicenter of evil is, it's the Iranian regime that is suppressing its people right now. I don't think we can be tepid about this. I think when we are neither hot nor cold against evil, evil prevails. And this is the time that we need to be passionate and unabashedly against this regime to support the Iranian people who seek the great unifying forces of liberties and freedoms that we enjoy here as Americans. So that's thing one. I sit on the Appropriations Committee, on the Defense Subcommittee, so I get all of the information. I sit on the Intelligence Committee as well here. I'm blessed to be on these very important committees, but I am too at the epicenter of the information flow and an awareness to what is going on around the planet. And so I don't take these things lightly. I don't underestimate the evil that does exist. And it's very clear to me that we as a body, as a House of Representatives, as well as the Senate, or the executive branch in our country, need to be 100% aligned on what we need to do here and what is good and what is wrong, and in this case, what is true evil in the form of the IRG. I am shocked by how many people have been ambiguous about the condemnation of a terrorist organization. The largest state-sponsored terrorist organization on this planet should not require anyone to be soft or have any doubts about how to react to that. I have personally flown combat missions in the Gulf. I have been targeted and illuminated by Iranian sensors as I launched from an aircraft carrier in support of the Iraqi folks at that time in 2003 during the first 6 months of Operation Iraqi Freedom. I understand the area, the close proximity of all the nations there and just how fragile peace is in the Middle East. And if we want anything right now, it should be stability in the Middle East. And the biggest destabilizing force right now in the Middle East is Iran. The Iran regime, I should say, not the people. So I applaud what the people are trying to do there. They are doing and fighting the good fight just like we did back in the late 18th century in pursuit of this beautiful experiment that we call the United States. I'll end by saying there's 8 things that I think we as a body need to focus on. One, it's maximum pressure on the Iranian regime. Like I said, we can't be soft, we can't be ambiguous, we can't be ashamed to say that we oppose this regime, and we should literally put a boot on the throat in any form and fashion that we can, economically, culturally, with sanctions, when necessary, with military and kinetic means if substantiated. We need to make sure that the IRG remains a terrorist, deemed and labeled as such as a terrorist organization. They are that, so we should not have any qualms or issues with designating them as such. I have been fighting the fight to stop this $6 billion deal that has been pushed by this administration and others. I have made the analogy that while the regime says this $6 billion may be used for humanitarian purposes, that's like a junkie asking you for $20 and you saying you have to use this $20 for food. You can't buy drugs with this food. You can't hurt anyone with this or with this money. You can't hurt anyone with this money. The junkie is going to say he's going to buy food. He's going to promise you that. He's going to make you feel good about it. And as soon as you give him that money, he will go buy drugs and he will do something to hurt either himself or the people around him with that money. This is the same thing. Iran may say they're going to buy humanitarian goods and inventory with this $6 billion, but even if we allow that to be liquidated, it's freeing up cash for them to spend on either their nuclear ambitions or funding organizations like Hamas. We need to make sure that there is no joint comprehensive POA moving forward, no Iran nuclear deal. We need to do everything we can to make sure that they're not developing nuclear weapons. The joint comprehensive plan of action was none of those words. It wasn't joint, it wasn't comprehensive, and it wasn't a true plan of action. It was an enabler for the nascent nuclear program that we see now going parabolic. We need to do everything to stop that. We need to stop buying oil from them. We need to stop funding them. And we need to be publicly supporting the freedom fighters who are trying to do the right thing and establish a nation there. That leads me to the last two things, which is we as members of Congress need to stand up and not be ashamed to support this effort, to be very vocal about that support, do everything we can legislatively. And I'll end by saying we need to also pressure Albania now to recognize the political refugees coming out of Iran and give them the full protections that they deserve and, frankly, that they need. So God bless you all, guys. Thank you for everything that you do. There's a lot going on in the world right now. We have a blizzard of crises around the planet right now, but for me, this is, like I said, the epicenter of evil in the form of this regime and the IRG. So you've got my commitment. We'll do everything we can, and we'll shape minds and folks here on the legislative body. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. We are now joined by Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis from New York.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here today. It is great to have members of the Iranian American community here in Washington. And as you could see, you have tremendous support from both Republicans and Democrats, and I'm very proud to be among those who have demonstrated that I stand with all of you to the point where Iran has sanctioned me. So I would like to say that I'm very proud of that badge of honor. But as you heard from my colleagues today, we are taking these threats very seriously. The fact that Iran continues to fund terrorism is extremely troubling, and they have even made threats toward the United States, which is why we are so passionate about making sure that we not only hold them accountable, but that we make sure that our homeland is protected to the fullest extent. Not too long ago, one of my, not a constituent, she lives right outside my district, but many of you may know Mazi Al-Nahad, the reporter. She lives in Brooklyn, a borough that I represent, and they attempted to kidnap her as well. And these are some of the tactics that we are seeing on our own soil, which is extremely troubling. So how do we work together to try to counter these threats from Iran? You've mentioned, my colleagues have mentioned many of the things that we're trying to accomplish, but the bottom line here is that we need to work together to economically cripple this regime. That is the only way we are going to make sure that the United States is protected, that our ally, that Israel is protected, and making sure that we don't allow this regime to prosper and to continue these acts of terrorism. I believe that the maximum pressure campaign under the Trump administration was working. It was economically crippling, and I think it was a mistake to reverse course on the progress that was made by the previous administration. And that is why my colleagues and I have introduced legislation to reinstate sanctions. to gut Iran's ability to fund terrorism throughout the region, to sanction the supreme leader, and to force the president to enforce sanctions on Iran's oil sales. That is what we need to do if we are serious about being tough on this oppressor. We are working also diligently, and we must, to make sure that the United States holds the United Nations Human Rights Council accountable. That is one thing that I have not heard mentioned here today. But the fact that Iran, one of the most egregious violators of human rights, can not only serve but be named chair of the Human Rights Council is an absolute disgrace. And we need to speak out, not just as Americans, but urge our partners across the world. Democracy, freedom-loving nations around the world must unite with us on that issue. I'm the daughter of a Cuban refugee, so I can relate to some of the hardships that your families have experienced, because my mother experienced them as well. She's a refugee, had to flee the country. But why is Cuba also on the Human Rights Council? And those are the questions that we have to be asking. The fact that this Human Rights Council couldn't even condemn Hamas in the days following October 7th. An organization that was founded specifically after World War II to promote peace and prosperity, to make sure another Holocaust would never happen again. And they could not even condemn Hamas, and they continue to allow Iran to have a seat at the table of these important councils. And that is why we're working with my colleagues to strip funding from them until we see some type of accountability. Also, we must make sure that Iran does not get its hands on a nuclear weapon, meaning the Iran deal, I think, was a big mistake. We have to make sure this administration doesn't re-enter into such a deal. And certainly, if they choose to do so, Congress has the right to review and approve that deal, and that is the law, and it must not be violated by this administration. So I thank you all for coming today. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Know that you have bipartisan support here in Congress, and we will continue to rally with you to defeat this oppressor, to make sure that the people of Iran have human rights, have dignity, have free and fair elections, and I hope that same thing happens for my mother's homeland of Cuba. Thank you for participating.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We are now joined by Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California.
Well, good morning. I think it's still morning. What a delight to see all of you here. You know, I have been enjoying greeting some of you friends from California. And I've just got to say that the Iranian American community is one of the most talented, forthright, vigorous, and admirable groups in the United States. I am so grateful to you for being here. You know, you've got a panel, so I'm not going to speak for a long time. But, you know, sometimes those of us, we have deep divisions, as you know, in the United States House of Representatives. And sometimes we try and make distinctions to make our case in terms of party. But this is a situation in terms of freedom in Iran where there's universal advocacy, both parties. Everyone wants to make sure that there is change in Iran. We have steps that we can take, and we will take, and we have taken to incent that. But the truth is, change, regime change, is going to come from within Iran. We have people who are political prisoners here today, and you're going to hear from some of them. But the women of Iran, in particular, need to be called out for their bravery, for their vision and for their willingness to stand up for not only their future, but for freedom of every Iranian. We know that we cannot rest until we see Iran free, democratic, secular, and non-nuclear. Our voices can help make that happen. And I know that this panel discussion today will inform us all and inspire us to continue our efforts to support those seeking freedom in Iran. Thank you, and God bless you for all you have done.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. We are now joined by a longtime friend and a loyal friend to the Iranian people, Congressman Mario Diaz-Balart from Florida.
Good afternoon, folks. How you doing? I'm going to be very brief. You've heard from a lot of my colleagues, and first I want to thank the Organization of Iranian American Communities for not giving up, for your passion. You know that you are on the right side of history, so thank you. And as my dear friend Nasser Rashidi continues to remind me, and all of the other patriots, look, the Iranian regime is one of the greatest sources of evil in this planet. And as you've heard today, time and time again, we should never be shy about fighting evil. And so when we talk about the nuclear Iran, when we talk about the nuclear deal that frankly, insane, and we talk about, as you heard today, concessions to the Iranian regime, when you talk about all of those things, you know what we need to talk about? All of that has one solution: regime change in Iran. That is the solution. This is not that complicated. And we should not be shy. We should not be scared of advocating for that. Throughout history, there have been moments that we have advocated for regime change. When it makes sense, when it's obvious, when it's evil. So my dear friends, I want to thank you for what you are doing. I want to thank you for standing up for freedom. I want to thank you for not getting confused. I want to thank you for not giving up. And I am convinced that because of all of you and heroes in Iran who are sacrificing and giving so much for the cause of freedom, that Iran will be free, that Iran therefore will be nuclear free, that it will once again join the real civilized world, but it will not do that by being tempered or by us being shy. That will happen when the folks that are now destroying and controlling Iran are no longer. So thank you for your passion. Thank you for not giving up. And we will continue to fight for a truly free Iran. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for 30 years of dedication to the Iranian people. We are now joined by Congressman Ronnie Jackson from Texas.
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you guys for being here. Consider me and many of my colleagues here there today allies in the fight to bring freedom to the people of Iran. I'll do everything I possibly can. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I wholeheartedly support the desire for a democratic and a non-nuclear Iran. I'll tell you that, not to reiterate what everybody else has said, but we have to, this is a problem that has to be solved. I'll be honest with you, a lot of the problems that we're having in the country or in the world right now would not be a problem if we did not have the regime in Iran that we currently have. What's going on right now in Israel with Hamas would not be happening. I've talked to lots of folks on the national security side of the House, and unfortunately, during the Trump administration, the conversations that were going on within the regime in Iran was that they could not afford to support these terror proxies that they're supporting right now. They did not have the money for it. The sanctions were working, right? Unfortunately, we're in a situation now where the Biden administration has, given recently $6 billion, made it available to Iran, and they haven't been enforcing the sanctions on oil, which is another $40+ billion that they've had access to. What that's resulted in now the conversations are that they are flush with money. They can support Hezbollah, they can support the Houthis, they can support Hamas, they can support all of these terror groups that are attacking U.S. troops as well in Syria and in Iraq. So we have to stop that. We have to cut off the money. We can no longer provide this support. I think, the fact that we're doing this, with the assumption that there's going to be some kind of nuclear deal, that ship has sailed. We need to be tough with Iran. We need to shut off all of the money. We need to enforce the sanctions. If we don't, we are going to find ourselves in a war in the Middle East, and we cannot afford to do that. It's been mentioned that, the fight is from within. That's where the regime change is going to come from. But that's not going to be very easy to do if we don't do our part on the outside and we don't make it difficult for this regime to exist. So I'll just tell you, I haven't been supporting you in this fashion as long as my colleague Mario, who's up here, has been doing this for 30 years. I've only been in Congress for 3 years, but I count myself as one of your staunchest supporters. I will continue to do everything I can to make sure that you're proud of my support for your cause. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. We are now joined by Congresswoman Young Kim from California.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. I want to thank you for hosting me at today's event dedicated to addressing the Islamic Republic of Iran's support for terrorism abroad. As a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and serving as chairwoman of the Indo-Pacific Subcommittee, I'm committed to holding President Raisi and his terrorist-supporting cohort accountable for the regime's support for terrorist proxies around the Middle East and for the crimes against humanity that it commits against its own people. As you know, I introduced the Iran Counterterrorism Act of 2023. This will prohibit the administration from issuing a waiver on Iran sanctions unless either a joint resolution is passed by Congress or the administration can certify that the Iranian regime has ceased to provide support for international terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. I was also proud to vote in support of Chairman McCall's No Funds for Iranian Terrorism Act, which imposes sanctions on international financial institutions that process, participate in, or facilitate transactions using or involving the $6 billion in unfrozen Iranian assets that were transferred from South Korea to Qatar in exchange for 5 hostages that were kept in Iran in September. That's okay. Good. We cannot afford to embolden the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, any further. I will continue fighting to hold the IRI accountable and fighting for the freedom-loving Iranian people. And I want to thank you for being here and for your advocacy on this very important issue. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We are now joined by Congressman Pete Sessions from Texas.
Thank you very much and good morning. Thank you for taking, I guess it's afternoon by now. The line was long of people who come to express not only support for you, but to thank you for what you are doing. I've been involved in this process now for about 25 years as a member and was approached early on in Dallas, Texas, with not just the resistance, but the messaging about standing with solidarity. And I want to thank you for coming here. The bottom line is there is an effort that you're responsible for that you've done very well. And that is that you not only know your member of Congress, but they know you. And that's the other side of the equation. As an Eagle Scout, I learned a long time ago as I was getting my first class badge that when we did map and compass, to learn where we were going, we had to know where we were. And this is an issue that you have known where you are for years and years and stood properly and done the right things. And I want to applaud you. Your work inside, not only by yourself, but with members of Congress, has not only paid off, but is a reality today. What is talked about, whether it's by one of our Navy SEALs or whether it's talked about by just another member of Congress, is that the Iranians have chosen to have a proxy war against you and the United States of America and free people. This proxy war is getting closer and closer to outing the Iranians for who and what they are. The attractiveness of having two battle groups in the Gulf is very attractive to them. And yet they are going to have to see that we will not tolerate their continued behavior. We do not have to move it forward to take 100 days. They are there. The insistence that America has to have civility in the world, to support our friends, and to make sure we speak directly with the Iranians as the largest sponsor of terrorism is important, and that is why you are here today. Please know this, we do get it. You have looked at members of Congress and correctly handled us. This is a bipartisan issue. This is not one group of people against another in Congress, but rather we have a common alliance on this issue. And that is your work, and I congratulate you. Lastly, let me say this. You coming to Washington and speaking and seeing and hearing and working together is important. We need to see this, and we do. But you need to see that what we're trying to do is to work very carefully to avoid what I would consider to be a three-front war by the United States of America. We are not timid in that behavior. We do recognize and see where the alliances of evil are gathering together, whether it is China and Taiwan, whether it is Hamas in Israel, or whether it is other places in the Gulf. Please know this, we are pleased and proud that you as Americans and as people who have friends who are back home, who are under the thumb of this terrible Ayatollah, please go back to them and tell them, America is with you. You are doing your job just as we are doing our job. And for that I say thank you. May God be with you during this beautiful season of Christmas. And I look forward to working with you in the continued year that we have and coming back together again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. We are now joined by Congressman Van Orden from Wisconsin.
I am from the great state of Wisconsin, and one of my friends who lives there, his name is Kevin Hermaning. He was the youngest hostage taken when the embassy was seized by Khomeini. And if you ever think my resolve will bend, in support of your resistance movement, I want you to come to Wisconsin and sit down with me and Kevin, and we'll talk. These are very serious matters. I spent my entire adult life as a United States Navy SEAL, and I have fought these terrorists that Iran has been sponsoring, and they're responsible for the deaths of many of my friends. It's a very sobering subject, but I want you to know, absolutely, unequivocally, without a doubt, I will stand with you and your people until Iran is a free nation again. May God bless you and your families.
Thank you, Congressman. We are now joined by Congressman Randy Weber from Texas, who was also with us in Paris here recently over the summer.
Howdy. Come on, y'all. How many of y'all can see this picture of Texas here on the map? If y'all can see that, you can zoom in on the camera. Well, I'm proud to be from Texas. I tell you what, how many of y'all wish that we could kick the mullahs out and make Iran more like Texas? Come on. Y'all have heard me speak multiple times, which kind of makes me wonder, why do you keep inviting me back? You know, I follow a lot of speakers, and notwithstanding who was here earlier, but last week I followed a speaker that was so bad, they booed him throughout my entire talk. Some of y'all will get that on the way home. Okay. Well, look, we all know what's at stake here, so I want to address this matter regarding the Iranian regime. This is such, Pete Sessions, Congressman Sessions said this is a beautiful season. What a contrast we have, where we have liberty here, liberty in the United States, and there's a murderous regime over in Iran that wants to press everybody down and kill people if they don't agree with them. So it's disheartening to note that amidst our celebrations, the Iranian regime persists in oppressing its own people and contributing to violence in the region that Pete talked about. And y'all know that. They contribute more violence than any other country in the world. And you know what? It's time that it stopped. Y'all agree? And as Congressman Sessions said, their violence is not confined to just the Persian regime, if you want to call region, if you want to call it that. You turn on the news, you witness the horrors and all of the things that have been happening by their proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen. Just today, the Navy had to respond to the Houthi rebels one more time. This has got to stop. For far too long, the citizens of Iran have had to endure a regime that is murderous, violent, and it's time for freedom in Iran. Sad to report, and y'all know this, that the regime has actually increased the number of executions that's going on, just solely to create fear and to kill people who disagree with them. Consider this. Last month alone, most of y'all probably know this, they executed 120 people. It's time this has got to stop. This has got to stop. Do the math on that, 120 people in a month. Folks, that's 4 executions a day. That is 4 executions a day. How many of y'all were here in this very room last year when they had pictures of all those who were executed? Y'all remember that? Breaks your heart. Absolutely breaks your heart. It's got to stop. In my introduction, the lady said I was over in Paris, France. I got to meet with Miss Miriam Rajavi. And let me tell you something. She's the real deal. Would y'all agree? And it's about time we get her put in place. Talking about the executions, as many of y'all know, they've started the regime, the Iranian terroristic regime has started sham trials, including the MEK. Today, 104 of those leaders are being put on trial in absentia. They're not even there. and they're still going after them. But I tell you what, when you talk with Miss Maryam Rajavi and when you see her how many of y'all have seen her 10-point plan? That's what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. The National Councils of Resistance of Iran, or NCRI, is in their endeavor to create a democratic and inclusive government where there is freedom. Would y'all enjoy freedom if you could get it over there? Absolutely. They've included that 10-point plan, which is the separation of church and state, it's got gender equality in it, it's got the protection of minority rights, and I could go right down the list. Y'all know this. The Iranian people have consistently demonstrated their desire for a brighter future, even at the cost and sacrifice of their lives. It's about time that ended, don't you think? It's about time that ended. We're going to end the Iranian terroristic regime and get that future for Iran that those people deserve. They have the right to enjoy the fundamental rights to freedom, religious liberty, however they want to practice it, without being threatened with the fear of death. Now is the time to hold the mullahs accountable and extend our support to the Iranian people for the pursuit of freedom with peace. We call the Christmas season the season of peace. What a contrast. There's never the season of peace over in Iran. It's a season of fear, tyranny, execution, and misery. Y'all agree? Come on. So it's time that we get together, the government, more and more pressure is brought to bear on the Iranian regime. The U.S. government needs to cut off any aid to Iran's regime. No money. I don't care what they say it's for, because you know they're going to take that money, they're going to use it for their military machine, they're going to use it to oppress people, they're going to use it to kill people, and to export terrorism. It's time for that to stop. We need to impose more and more sanctions on that regime and hold them accountable for the killings not only inside Iran, but that it's spreading throughout the regime, throughout the region. We've got to do that. The United States should lead the initiative to put the Ayatollah and his mullahs on trial for crimes against humanity, for crimes of genocide, international terrorism, and hostage-taking. It's time they lost their power. It's time they were held accountable for the murdering, vicious thugs that they are, and the United States needs to take the lead in doing that. And Pete Sessions kind of talked about it a little bit. Maybe in this war that's going on right now, as more and more attention gets put on Iran, maybe other nations, we will wake up and will say enough is enough. So in the United States, you all know this, we understand the right of life. We understand the right of our citizens to self-defense as protected by the Second Amendment. Some of y'all have heard me say that Texas has more concealed handgun licensees for pistols than any other state in the union. So we love self-defense in the Second Amendment in Texas. We also love the First Amendment guarantees of freedom of speech, freedoms of religion, and assembly. Now contrast that to what they've got going in Iran. Contrast that. We're defenseless citizens with no Second Amendment rights, no way to defend themselves, suffer under a regime of murdering thugs with an armed government. That is so wrong. It's time to change that. In Congress, we've introduced several bills advocating for the safety, security, and rights of the Iranian people. Most recently, my fellow Texan Lance Gooden introduced House Resolution 627, which condemns the regime for the massacre of political prisoners in 1988. And I can do this without notes. What was it? Now, sir, about 30,000 people, give or take. I mean, it's unbelievable how bad it has been and still continues to be. I'm proud to be an original co-sponsor of Lance Gooden's bill, which now includes more than half of the Texas delegation. There's 38 of us. Includes more than half of the Texas delegation alone. As of yesterday, with the addition of Congressman Russell Fry of South Carolina, we now have 136 co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle. So let me just tell you what y'all all know. The quest for a free Iran is not just an Iranian issue. As recent world events have demonstrated, it affects us all. We're all in this together. So as we gather today, let me tell you, this Congress, this congressman, our state, y'all, this group here, we're going to reaffirm our commitment to say we're going to stand with the Iranians, we're going to fight for freedom, we're going to fight for democracy and human rights, we're going to stand right solidly behind Miriam Rajavi, make sure she gets her 10-point plan in place. If we do that, Iran will have a brighter future. God bless y'all. Thank y'all for having us.
Thank you, Congressman Weber, and thank you again to all of our speakers today so far. Our discussion today is set against the backdrop of growing concern over Iran's role in the Middle East and beyond. The surge in human rights violations within Iran, its accelerating nuclear ambitions, and its influential role in regional conflicts presents a complex triad of challenges that demand our urgent attention and decisive action. Today, we are here to address some very important questions that are not just timely, but pivotal in shaping our understanding and response to these challenges. First, what is the role of Iran in the region's crisis? Iran's influence in the Middle East, particularly through its support of proxy groups and involvement in countries like Syria, Yemen, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip, has been a central figure in ongoing conflicts. This discussion will aim to unravel the multifaceted nature of Iran's involvement and its implications for regional stability. Why has Iran announced over 220 executions since October 7th? This alarming and growing number of executions, including those of minors and dissidents, speaks volumes about the internal repression and human rights situation in Iran. We seek to understand the motives behind these actions and the message the Iranian regime is sending to its citizens and the world. Third, why has Iran's regime again elevated its terror campaign abroad? The international community has observed with concern the uptick in Iran's external aggressive maneuvers. Understanding the rationale behind these actions is crucial in developing effective counter-strategies and in mitigating the threat posed by these activities. The Iranian regime is conducting crimes at home and abroad, under and Iran's President Ebrahim Raisi has been widely condemned by numerous human rights organizations and is the subject of various House resolutions with strong bipartisan support from members of Congress. He was a member of the Death Commission responsible for the execution of political prisoners during the 1988 massacre and the killing of hundreds of protesters in 2022. 90% of those massacred in 1988 were members of Iran's main opposition, the MEK. Just yesterday, Agence France-Presse reported a legal complaint filed by the witnesses of the 1988 massacre, calling on the Swiss authorities to arrest Iran's president during his visit and charge him with crimes against humanity. The complaint asked Swiss federal prosecutor Andres Muller to ensure the arrest and prosecution of Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi over his participation in acts of genocide, torture, extrajudicial executions, and other crimes against humanity. Later in the day, the Iranian president refrained from leading the delegation and instead sending his foreign minister. The call for justice and accountability is central to the movement for regime change in Iran. In response, Tehran's regime has initiated legal theatrics and summoned 104 members of the MEK, who are based in Paris and Albania. This move by a criminal regime indicates their fear of the MEK as an existential threat. There is no rule of law in Iran. Their inhumane laws serve the supreme leader, who envisions nothing but violence and terror. We all know this legal move by Tehran's regime against the MEK is a precursor to their nefarious acts of violence and terror in Europe. To confront it, We must adopt a firm policy in dealing with the head of the snake in Tehran. I raise these points to contextualize our discussion today. I want to thank all of our panelists and their patience today for being here, and thank them for enriching our discussions. We are expecting several more members of Congress to join us here today, and we'll of course pause our panel discussions in favor of the members when they arrive. With that, let us start the panel discussion with Ms. Mina Entezari, the leader and member of Iranian American community of Arizona, who has worked relentlessly on the issue of human rights in Iran, with special focus on the status of political prisoners. Ms. Entezari, we are so glad to have you join us today.
Hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. Today, I stand you. Just remember my friends. Today, I stand before you as a former political prisoner who has been imprisoned for 7 years and has seen the horrors of what takes place in the mullahs' prisons, which includes torture, massacre, and horrific crimes against humanity. I came as a witness to the crimes of the Iranian regime and discussed the dire situation of human rights in Iran. But I am also here to commend bipartisan members of Congress who have advocated for America's core values and commitments as a nation devoted to human rights and democratic principles. The struggle for an Iranian republic has been long. Through many congressional resolutions, we have seen how members of Congress from both parties have expressed unequivocal support for the Iranian people's aspirations for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran, while condemning the grave human rights violations and the state-sponsored terrorism perpetuated by the Iranian government. Ebrahim Raisi, regime's president, is a mass murderer and responsible for the 1988 massacre of political prisoners, including all of my former cellmates. Just last week, we heard he's planning to attend the 2023 Global Refugee Forum in Switzerland. Why? He must be held accountable for his crimes instead of attending such events. In 2023, so far, more than 600 people have been executed under his watch. Why is the international community turning a blind eye to these facts? Since 2017, we have witnessed a surge in widespread protests across Iran, sparked by deep-seated grievances against the oppressive regime of mullahs. From the tragic death of Navid Afkari to the killing of over 1,500 peaceful protesters in November 2019, to killing of Mahsa Amini last year, the ongoing suppression of voices demanding change, the Iranian regime has consistently responded with brutal force. The execution of young activists like Mohsen Shekari and Majid Reza Rahnavard underscores the regime's ruthless tactics. Since the September 2022 uprising, we also have seen the bravery of the Iranian people, especially young generations, who stand up to the harrowing reality of non-stop violence by the mullahs regime. Iranian regime, like other dictators, is under the illusion that it can crush the democratic aspiration of a nation by continuous violence and terror. But they have seen the resistance of the Iranian nation. Ladies and gentlemen, the arrests, tortures, executions, and forced disappearances in Iran are not isolated incidents, but part of a systematic pattern of abuse and repression that the Iranian regime has perpetuated for decades. Our community leaders and members of Congress today are not just declaring a statement of solidarity with the Iranian people. Together, we call for action. This is a recognition that the time has come to place human rights at the center of our policy towards Iran. The time has come to recognize the resistance of Iranian nation as the alternative to this regime. We believe the Iranian regime, Ali Khamenei, and the notorious IRGC are the head of the snake, who have not only inflicted terror and repression within Iran's borders, but also has exported its extremist ideology and tactics beyond its boundaries. I am reminded of the bipartisan House Resolution 100 with absolute majority that warned us about the Iranian regime's role in the region, which has destabilizing effect on the entire region. And today, we see how it poses a significant threat to global security. As member of the Iranian American community, I argued that by targeting the head of the snake, we will address the root cause of this instability and terror. We must support the Iranian people in their struggle against a regime that has consistently shown blatant disregard for human life and basic human dignity. The ongoing protests are not mere expressions of dissent in Iran. They are a clarion call for popular revolution, a rejection of both monarchic dictatorship and religious tyranny. By standing with the Iranian people, America is not only upholding its values, but also contributing to the stability and security of the Middle East. Thank you all for the time given to me.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Entazari, for your insightful remarks about the situation inside of Iran and the call to address the root cause of the problem. Unfortunately, it looks like we're having some technical difficulties with the camera, so when I introduce the next speaker, I would ask if you could please come up to the podium to speak instead of speaking from the table there. With that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Firuz Daneshgari. He's an executive, academician, and surgeon and scientist whose life story is an inspiration for us. Dr. Daneshgari is also the leader of the Iranian American community of Ohio. Welcome, Doctor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Firuz Daneshgari, and I stand today before you not as a surgeon scientist, as an academician or an executive entrepreneur, but as really a living testament to the massive human rights violations that carries on by Tehran regime. As you heard from the members of the Congress, everyone knows that this regime is the head of the snake. As a former political prisoner, very much like my friend Mina, I was arrested and tortured in the notorious Evin prison, so we share some common stories. And I have mounted the countless classmates. Ladies and gentlemen, listen to this as you're having your lunch. Nearly half of my classmates at Tehran University have been executed or missed in action. Half of my classmates in the country where less than 10% of people get the opportunity to go to university were executed or missed. So that is why, very much like the Congressman Sherman, I have been with the resistance for the past 45 years. Ever since I escaped Iran, my family and I, we came and settled in the US. For the young staffers who are here and taking notes, please listen. The evil is not in the books, it's not in the stories, it's not a metaphor. It's real, it's tangible, and it's sitting in Tehran. That's why I call the regime in Tehran evil, because of the documented horrors of 1988 massacre. Many of my classmates during the massacre, they lost their lives, which is one of the darkest parts of history in Iran. Over 30,000 political prisoners, majority of them under the age of 30. They were hung, although many of them, or most of them, had received their sentences or completed their sentences. The majority of those were executed were the members and supporters of Mujahideen Khalq Iran, MEK. And this is well documented by Amnesty International and other international organizations. Under the fatwa, or the order that issued by Khamenei, a crime against humanity. Absolutely well documented with any type of evidence. And the troubling part is that the person who was sitting on that panel, on that death panel, and I would encourage some of you or all of you to go to Ashraf 3 in Albania, because they have built a beautiful museum where it depicts how that panel, the death panel carried on, and there is a picture of Raisi there, who now carries the title of the President of Iran, was carried on by these criminals who are sitting there in Tehran. This regime's atrocities have expanded over the decades, over the past 4.5 decades. 1999, 2009, 17, 18, 19, 2020. And the reason for that is the Iranian people are fed up with this regime, and every chance they get, they stand up to throw this regime to the garbage of the history. And this world has repeatedly witnessed the brutal suppression of those uprisings. Nevertheless, Iranian people have not and will not give up, especially the women who have led the recent revolution starting in 2022. The problem is that Iran's tyranny transcends the border, its border. Iran stands on two legs, as I said this morning in the Fox News commentaries I made. One leg is suppressing its own people, killing on its people, my classmates, my friends and families, Mina's friends and classmates. And the other leg is exporting terrorism, sponsoring terrorism outside its border, because it wants to spread the fear that if you touch me, I'm going to blow up your embassies, I'm going to blow up and I'm going to kill you. And it is with the same process that I learned today, a funny story, frankly, is that they have started the sham trial in absentia, as one of the congressmen said, over 104 leaders of the MEK to basically take him to their court system. And if there is one country in the world, one regime in the world that does not understand, nor does it believe in the rule of law, that is the Tehran regime. They're trying to mimic this, to basically hijack our belief, the Western world's belief in the court system, to present that they have a judicial system, they have a court system. None of my classmates who were executed, they went through a court. Did yours too, Mina? But now they're setting up a court system to take the leaders of the resistance, and I'll tell you why. I'm a biologist. I connect the physiology to pathophysiology. They're trying this to create a paper trail in their system so they can defend the export of terrorism to come after us in the United States, in the Europe, after the leaders of the resistance. That is why they're putting up this sham trial in Iran, and it has to be condemned today, because they started today. This regime has carried out hundreds of thousands of attacks by its direct forces, by its proxy forces outside its borders, and this is not a secret for anyone in this audience. We must prevent Ebrahim Raisi, the murderer, the person who is accused of the crime against humanity that portrays himself as a president in the national stage. He needs to be arrested, he needs to be brought to justice, And the United Nations Human Rights Council, as the congressman from New York mentioned, must initiate a fact-finding, throw Iran out of this commission, and arrest this murderer who once in a while tries to come to Europe, and we stop him. The ongoing human rights violations by Iranian regime, including the suppression of ethnic and religious minorities and crackdown on dissidents, must be condemned on the strongest terms. The United States, in partnership with Albania, must safeguard the MEK rights as political refugees and witnesses, enduring their protection and right to speak out. Let me tell you here, ladies and gentlemen, I have a handful of my classmates from Tehran University School of Medicine who escaped Iran. They're in Albania, they're in Ashraf. I was in Ashraf 2 weeks ago. If the regime is pretending that these people are terrorists, I'm one of that group. I'm a terrorist. I declare here. This regime is hijacking, they're abusing and misusing the terminologies we have, the systems we have here to pretend they're a part of the international peace-loving nations. They're the abusers of our systems. The path to peace and stability in the region is very, very clear. It starts and ends in Tehran. The head of the snake is in Tehran, ladies and gentlemen. The international community must stand in solidarity with the Iranian people's quest for a democratic, secular, and non-nuclear Republic of Iran. The international community must recognize the right of us as Iranian people to overthrow this regime and support our call for regime change. Enough is enough. This regime change needs to be mandated and needs to be carried out by policymakers in this country. We've had 45 years of terrors, tyranny, killing, and export of terrorism. Now is the time for action. Our silence, our giving them the bribes, our appeasement with them, our not enforcing the sanction policies only emboldens us and empowers this tyrannic regime. We must amplify the voices of Iranian people and to be the beacon of hope in their fight for freedom. I thank you for listening to my points here. I am a living witness of what this regime is. And I beg you go back to your offices, go back to your congressmen, to your senators, and tell them, please, the time of action is now. No more appeasement with this regime. Iranian people are ready to throw this regime to the garbage of the history, and they will do that, and we only need your support by not appeasing this regime. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daneshgari. We appreciate your powerful testimony and insightful remarks on how this illegal regime has continued to abuse international norms and platforms for its nefarious agenda. We are now going to pause our panel for just a moment as we are joined by Congressman Rich McCormick from Georgia.
It is a pleasure to be amongst friends. We have a common goal. We understand an evil theocracy that's caused hate and discontent all over the world is oppressing a very good people, our friends, those who are being held under the thumb of a small minority of violent people who would do harm, not just to an entire populace, but also to a gender. The people who have their rights smashed and subdued, the people who aren't able to speak and act freely. If freedom is not at the center of who we are, given to us by God Almighty, the irony is that a theocracy that claims that they're on the side of God is using a God that's put the idea of freedom in our heart and demolish that idea amongst its own people. They use this same idea of God to spread violence and kill people all over the world. They use the idea of God to oppress, afflict, torture, kill, subvert governments, cause hate and discontent, divide people, divide races, divide genders. Know that you have a friend. Know that you have many friends. Know that we'll do whatever it takes, for however long it takes, to continue this fight, to be resolute with you, to make sure that we speak against these evils, that we take every opportunity to subdue that government, to subvert that government, to overthrow that government until freedom reigns for all. If there's anything that we can do, anything we're not doing, if there's anything you have an idea on, anything we can go to battle for, let us know. We're on your side. God bless you, and Semper Fidelis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Congressman McCormick. We're going to resume our panel now, and our next speaker is Parsa Arya. He's a student activist from Texas, and he has been focusing on the role of the resistance units in Iran. Thank you, Parsa.
Howdy, ladies and gentlemen. Today, as an Iranian American student activist, I stand before y'all, not just to speak, but to echo the defiant cries for liberty rising from Iran. Cries that are shaping the destiny of a nation. These are not mere protests. They are a revolution in the making. A revolution spearheaded by a courageous nation demanding regime change. The slogans rising from the streets of Iran, down with the dictator, down with Khamenei, down with the dictators, be it the Shah or the mullahs, or neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I give my life for Iran. These are not just rallying cries. They are the embodiment of a profound and unwavering commitment to the freedom movement for the Iranian nation. At the heart of this movement are the MEK resistance units, the vanguards of this struggle. They are not just participants. They are leaders. Leaders who understand the true cost of freedom. Leaders who understand how to organize people and the fact that it's an intricate art. It's incredibly difficult. And they know the path. Sorry, pardon me. They know the path, and they possess the unwavering resolve to overthrow this regime. The MEK resistance units, they're the bearers of hope, the architects of change. It is their hands that are steadily and assuredly dismantling the pillars of tyranny. Our role in supporting this pivotal movement cannot be overstated. To stand with the Iranian people means to stand with the MEK resistance units. Recognizing their indomitable spirit and pivotal role, this is what we must do to inform and shape U.S. policy towards Iran. It's not just about applying pressure. It's about aligning our actions with those who are laying their lives down for liberty. It is about adopting a policy that resonates with the heartbeats of those on the frontiers of freedom. In line with this, we advocate for several things. An immediate freeze of all regime assets, as mandated by the bipartisan H.R. 5951. This is not merely a financial blockade. It is a strategic move to impede the regime's ability to suppress its people. The full implementation of all congressional sanctions. These are not just punitive measures. They are statements of solidarity, of standing shoulder to shoulder with the brave souls fighting on the ground. A steadfast refusal to give in to the regime's demands, especially when they seek to marginalize and silence the opposition, the very heart of the resistance. More than political support, the Iranian people and the MEK resistance units seek moral support, recognition and amplification on the global stage. They are not asking us to fight their battle. They are asking us to acknowledge the legitimacy of their struggle and to ensure their voices resonate in every corner of the world. The MEK resistance units have shown us what it takes to challenge a regime that has long thrived on fear and oppression. They have shown us the power of organized, relentless resistance. They are not just fighting for the soul of Iran, they are defending the very principle of human dignity and democracy. As we gather here, let's remember that the struggle for freedom in Iran is a litmus test for the free world. It is a call to action for all who believe in the universal values of freedom and human rights. Lastly, I urge you as leaders, policymakers, and advocates to recognize the MEK resistance units as the key to shaping effective U.S. policy for Iran. Our support for them is not just a moral obligation, it's a strategic imperative. In standing with the MEK, we stand with the future of Iran, a future defined by freedom, democracy, and human dignity. Let us pledge our unwavering support and ensure that the sacrifices made by so many will lead to dawn of freedom in Iran. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Parsa, for your powerful message of advocacy for the resistance units inside of Iran. I'd like to share some exciting news now. Congressman Lance Gooden has officially registered the Bipartisan Congressional Ashraf Protection and Rights Advocacy Caucus. The caucus will be a platform through which members of Congress can engage in substantive discussions regarding the evolving issues and developments concerning the well-being and challenges faced by Iranian dissidents residing in Ashraf 3, located in Albania. The caucus will focus primarily on the following issue areas: protection and advocacy for Iranian dissidents. They will work to ensure the protection and advocacy for the rights of Iranian dissidents, including those living in Ashraf 3. And collaborate with pertinent United States government agencies to engage with European allies, particularly those situated in the Balkans where Iran's influence has extended, in order to enforce accountability for Iran's violations of diplomatic privileges. Further, they will advocate for nations to take measures aimed at curbing the nefarious activities conducted by the